Hi, boys and girls. This is Ms. Kathy. I'm so happy you've joined me today for another story just for you. Do you like visiting museums? Have you ever been in a museum of children's art? What if your museum were showing a collection of paintings of children, and one of the pieces was mysteriously missing? That's what happens to Sammy and Jenny in this new Shoebox Kids mystery. Along the way, Sammy learns that helping others is part of what it means to be a Christian. Chapter 1. Mysterious Stranger. Sammy Tan discovered two things while standing on his head in the art gallery. First, that blood rushes to your head and it starts to hurt after a while. And second, that strange-looking art still looks strange upside down. Gradually, Sammy's body slid down from the wall he was leaning against. The world slowly turned right side up again. Sammy frowned and sat up, looking at the painting across the room. It still looked weird. Splotches of blue, green, and yellow covered wiggly black lines that ran from side to side. "What are you doing, Sammy?" Sammy looked up from the floor to see Jenny Wallace walking toward him. "Looking at sunspots," he answered. "Sunspots? Where?" she asked. Sammy pointed toward the painting on the other wall as Jenny sat down on the floor next to Sammy. "I can't figure out why it's called sunspots," Sammy said. Jenny looked at the painting silently. Then she said, "Well, have you ever looked at sunspots before? How do you know what they look like?" "I've looked at an eclipse through special glasses," Sammy said. "I didn't see anything that was green or blue like that." "Well, artists have a lot of imagination," Jenny explained, trying to defend the painting. Sammy laughed and looked at the colorful splotches. "They must have to call something like that sunspots." "What are you doing here?" Jenny asked him again. Sammy jumped up and walked over to a bronze sculpture of a woman with a hole in her stomach. He reached his arm through the sculpture and shook hands with himself. "Right now I'm waiting for my grandfather," Sammy said. "He's taking a tour with some people in the other room. I'm supposed to wait for him here. We're going to see them open a new exhibit of some famous painter in the South Wing, Shepley Matthews or something." Sammy stood on his tiptoes and tried to put his head through the hole in the statue's stomach. "I think that's Sheffield Matheson, the painter, that is." Jenny frowned at Sammy, who twisted his head as if it were stuck in the hole. "I don't think we're supposed to do that." "Why else would they put a hole in her stomach?" Sammy asked. He sighed and pulled his head out of the hole. "What about you? Why are you here, Jenny Wallflower?" "Don't call me that, Sam Mule," she emphasized the last part of his name. "My name is Wallace, and to answer your question, my mom is in charge of raising money for the new children's wing they're going to build here for the museum. She's in a meeting right now." "Whoa, wait a minute," he said. "I know about bird wings. What's a children's wing?" Jenny looked at him through the hole in the statue's stomach. "It's a neat place in a museum where they let you learn all about art and feel things and climb all over them." She looked at Sammy, who now had both of his arms in the statue's hole, and was trying to climb inside it. "Not that that's ever stopped you." "Ahem." Sammy and Jenny heard someone clear his throat. Sammy climbed out of the hole quickly. "Sorry, grandfather," Sammy said, suddenly embarrassed. Jenny backed away, giggling. "Sammy, art is for enjoying with the eyes, not with the hands, feet, and elbows," Grandfather Tan said, wagging his finger in front of Sammy's face. Sammy didn't have a chance to respond. A crowd of people followed Mr. Tan into the room, and Sammy realized that they were all headed to the South Wing to see the exhibit opening. Sammy looked at all the faces and saw Mrs. Wallace coming toward them. Sammy thought he saw someone else he recognized, but the person disappeared behind a group of others. "Sammy, Mr. Tan!" Mrs. Wallace exclaimed. "It's good to see you." "Hi, Mrs. Wallace," Sammy said. "Jenny told me that you were in charge of raising money for the new children's wing here." Mrs. Wallace smiled at Sammy, then looked at Mr. Tan. "That's right, Sammy. It's going to be a great place for kids to visit, and all kids, ages 12 and under, will get to come free any time they want to." "All right," Sammy said, suddenly excited. "How much money do you have to raise?" Mr. Tan asked. Mrs. Wallace grew serious. $75,000. "Wow," Sammy said. "I can't even imagine that much money. I don't know anybody that has that much money." Mrs. Wallace crouched down in front of Sammy. "You're right, it's a lot of money, but it's for a good cause, and if each of us do our part to raise it, I really think Mill Valley can afford to build this new wing." Mrs. Wallace squinted at Sammy and Jenny. "Say, how would the Shoebox Kids like to be involved in doing a little fundraising?" Sammy and Jenny looked at each other. "How much do we get paid?" Sammy asked Jenny. Jenny frowned. The idea is to raise money, not pay people like you. You're supposed to volunteer. Why don't we get the group together at our house this weekend? Mrs. Wallace asked. We can discuss the possibilities, have some snacks, maybe play a few games. Yeah, a regular party, Jenny said. Well, okay, Sammy said finally. Grandfather Tan, Sammy, Jenny, and Mrs. Wallace heard a shout, and then applause. They looked up to see a man in a suit cut a ribbon, and then gesture for people to enter the doorway to the south wing. Sammy and the others joined the crowd and filed into a long room. Mounted on the walls on both sides were large paintings of children. I can't see, Jenny whispered. She stood on her tiptoes, trying to look through the crowd. Sammy looked around, then tugged on her sleeve. Come on. Sammy led Jenny to a concrete bench standing right in the center of the room. They climbed onto the bench and stood up. Much better, Jenny said. Wow, there must be 100 people in here. They looked around the room at the crowd. A man up front was talking about the paintings. This is truly a historic occasion, the man said. As director of the Mill Valley Art Museum, it is an honor for me to introduce this display of fine art to our city. But it is historic because this is the first time that all of Sheffield Matheson's works have been displayed at one place. It took a long time for me to arrange for this exhibit, but the fact that Sheffield Matheson was born, lived, and died here in Mill Valley made a big difference, and the effort was well worth it. Sammy looked around him at the paintings. All the pictures showed children. Sammy was fascinated by how the artist showed them. One showed 3 boys in a snowball fight. Another showed girls painting a fence. One showed 2 girls swinging on a tire swing while boys in the tree above them yelled at them. Sammy could almost hear them talking. Then Sammy noticed that something was wrong. "Excuse me," he said out loud. "Mr. Director, I have a question." "Sammy, don't interrupt," Grandfather Tan said quietly. "No, it's all right," the director said. "What is it, son?" Sammy pointed at the wall in front of him. "There are 6 paintings on that wall." He moved his hand to point at the opposite side. "And only 5 on that wall. How come?" Jenny poked him in the ribs. "Because there's only 11 paintings, silly," she said. "No, that's not quite right," the director said. "This set of paintings is called the Broken Dozen." He pointed at the far corner. Sheffield Matheson wanted to paint children in each month of the year, but you'll notice that we have left a space between numbers 10 and 12 over there. That's because number 11 disappeared in the fire that caused Mr. Matheson's death in 1964. It was actually just a few blocks from here. "Well, didn't the painting just burn up in the fire?" someone else asked. "Some think so, but the police who examined the fire say no. They said it would have left traces of the special fabric he painted on, and Sheffield Matheson was very careful to protect his paintings from fire." The director folded his hands over his chest. "It's just another unsolved mystery. In this case, it makes the work of Sheffield Matheson more interesting." "Wow, a mystery." Sammy nudged Jenny. "Wouldn't it be great if we could find that missing painting?" "Yes, it would be like the treasure map Chris found and the secret codes Willie got over his computer," Jenny answered. "Let's see if the director can give us any more clues." Sammy listened to the director while he looked around the room. He had a strange sensation that someone was watching him. He scanned the paintings, then started looking around the room. A thin, gray-haired man on the far side of the room, dressed in an overcoat, turned and looked at Sammy. Sammy stared at him, thinking he should know him. Sammy smiled at the man and waved. The man didn't smile back. "Who is that man, Jenny?" Sammy whispered. "I feel like I should know him." Jenny looked past Sammy. "What man?" Jenny whispered back. "The gray-haired man in the raincoat," Sammy said. "Right over." Sammy turned and pointed. But the man was gone.
The story you have heard today is a chapter of The Shoebox Kids, Book 5, The Broken Dozen Mystery, written by Glenn Robinson, edited and created by Jerry D. Thomas, and used with permission from the Pacific Press Publishing Association. If you're interested in any other books published by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, please visit AdventistBookCenter.com or call 1-800-765-6955.
This podcast is a production of the Carolina Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.